this evening. Thank you, Cleo. And if you have got any techie issues, you can just drop a note in the chat, and Cleo, who is our communications officer, will do her best to field those. So she's working behind the scenes to organise everything. And please do tweet with hashtag healthy communities. I think Cleo will also put that into healthy communities. So if I can hand over to Ketan.
Thank you, Frances. Wow, what a welcome. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. It really is so good to see so many of you on Zoom screen. But of course, today is particularly special to be joined by my great friend, Professor Jonathan Valabhji, OBE, the National Clinical Director for Diabetes and Obesity. As chair of Northwest London Joint Scrutiny Committee and lead governor for Central and Northwest London NHS Foundation Trust, I take a very keen interest in diabetes wellness. Diabetes is a common illness and one that most people know about. Perhaps not everyone knows the difficult it can be to manage. We all know how important access to treatment is for people living with diabetes. We also know the valuable work that carers, be they family, friends, or healthcare workers, do to help support those living with diabetes. So it really does give me a great pleasure to see so many carers here. And for me to be able to say wholehearted thank you for everything you do to support and help people with diabetes. You show tremendous courage every day in things that you do. You show what is possible, and you are a source of great inspiration. Today, we know that rate of diabetes is rising dramatically, with 3 million people in England registered as living with type 1 and type 2 diabetes with a GP. Although the true number is likely to be higher, with up to 1 million more people who are unaware that they may have diabetes. And friends, behind those statistics, as everyone here is aware, are the devastating consequences for people's health. People of all ages, young and old. So this really is one of the great health challenges of our time. And I am very pleased that we have people who are leading the change in the way that we can deal with diabetes. As a parliamentary ambassador for diabetes, I know only too well the work the NHS is doing, and I'm sure we will be hearing about this from Jonathan shortly. But I also want to take this opportunity to say a very big thank you to those of you working to raise awareness, to those working on innovations, treatments, and exploring possible cures, and to those of you who care for people living with diabetes and provide the support so that they can live the best possible lives. I am reminded of a quote by Olympic gold medalist Sir Steve Redgrave. Diabetes must learn to live with me rather than me live with diabetes. I am sure you will agree with me. This is incredibly powerful. I am sure it will provide inspiration for many who are determined not to let diabetes get in the way of living their lives to the fullest. And friends, talking about inspiration, let me introduce Jonathan. As National Clinical Director, he's the clinical lead for the NHS England Diabetes Programme, including both the Diabetes Treatment and Care Programme, a collaboration between the NHS England, Public Health England, and Diabetes UK, which in summer 2018 saw England become the first country in the world to achieve full national coverage with an evidence-based type 2 diabetes prevention program. So, Jonathan, over to you. So grateful to you, my friend, for taking the time out to join us from your very busy schedule. And as Francis said, I'm really looking forward to this evening's session, particularly with so many of us with direct or indirect experience of diabetes. And I think if we can spend, say, 15, 20 minutes with an overview, that would be really helpful, Jonathan. And I know you got 1 or 2 slides as well to share. So perhaps that will be really useful for our colleagues on the Zoom call. And after that, friends, I'm very keen, as Francis was saying at the outset, to take 1 or 2 questions from you too. So please do use the chat function, not just to use it for the tweets and hashtag, but also to potentially share your thoughts about potential questions that you would like Jonathan to answer. So without further ado, Jonathan, over to you. And let's give him a round of applause for all the time that is taken to join us this evening. A virtual hand of applause.
Thank you so much, Ketan. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's lovely to be here this evening. I recognize quite a few names here. I've been scrolling through the people who have dialed in already. So lovely to be here. Great to see you, friends and colleagues. And I'll do my best to entertain for the next 20 minutes or so. That was a lovely introduction, Ketan. I've been qualified as a doctor now for 32 years. Amazing how young I looked, considering that. No. Sorry. So I've been practicing for 32 years, and most of those years has been not far away from where any of you are sitting right now. I'm sort of down the road at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington, part of Imperial. And I've been practicing in the field of diabetes for the large part of that, so a good quarter of a century. That sounds quite a sobering fact, doesn't it? And you know, it's been really a great pleasure to be looking after my people with diabetes over those many years. But it means I've accrued a lot of expertise. I've done a lot locally. I moved to some regional projects in about 2010. And then in 2013, I was appointed to the National Clinical Director role for England. And my life has been somewhat different since that time in 2013. I'm in my 10th year now, actually. And actually, I spend around half my time in the national role, but the other half of my time still practicing at the hospital. So I could talk probably for the next 3 days on diabetes and would thoroughly enjoy doing that, but obviously I mustn't do that. And Ketan has given me quite a specific brief, which is to talk about type 2 diabetes prevention, which is really important. I'll focus on that, but obviously very happy to take questions much more broadly if people would like to go more broadly than that. I'll share a few slides, if I may. Let me see if I can technologically succeed in doing that. Let's have a look. Bear with me, sorry all. There it is. Can people see my slides? Is that a yes? Great.
Yes,
great.
That's
great.
Thank you.
Okay, so the title that you've given me, Ketan, is The Pathway to Preventing Type 2 Diabetes. And I'm going to give you a bit of a backdrop to that and some of the punchlines that go with that as well. Maybe let me just enlarge. How's that? Is that okay?
Perfect. Beautiful. Thank you.
So I'm going to start with there are many factors that come into play to determine which of us will and which of us won't develop diabetes. I'm going to focus my talk today on type 2 diabetes, which is the commonest form of diabetes. About 3.2 million people in England that we know about. Ketan has already alluded to the fact that there may be another almost 1 million people out there who don't yet know about it. There is a much smaller population of around 280,000 people with type 1 diabetes, which is quite different. That's what we call an autoimmune disease that often befalls people at very young ages, even in childhood. And we don't know how to prevent type 1 diabetes. So I'm not going to focus for this evening on type 1 diabetes. I'm going to focus on the vast majority, the disease that affects the vast majority with diabetes, and that's type 2 diabetes. Now, there are many determinants of type 2 diabetes. Age is one. I've already paid sort of oblique reference to my grey hair in terms of the number of years I've been practicing, but age we cannot modify, alas. But that's a very important factor in who gets and who doesn't get type 2 diabetes. Ethnicity is really important. We know that people from South Asian communities, Black communities are at particularly high risk, and I'll play out that fact in a little more detail as we go along. But such things are, let's say, non-modifiable. You know, we are born the way we're born. We age the way we age. Men are at slightly higher risk than women. But there is a really important, what I call modifiable risk factor, and that is our body weight. And what we've seen, and this first slide gives us data. This is data over a 25-year period from 1993 through to 2018. That just tracks the percentage of the population across England whose body mass index, that's a measure of, we use it to classify overweight and obesity. Those people in whom their body mass index falls within the obese range, you can see how that has increased for both men in green and women in red over the last 25 years or so. Now, while people are very quick to say that we've got a particularly significant problem in England, this is panning out across the world. The importance for this evening is that this is probably the most potent modifiable risk factor for those of us who are destined to develop type 2 diabetes. If we put on weight, it will manifest. And as a society across the country over decades, really post-Second World War, we have had more readily available nutrition, and we have all, dare I say, expanded our waistlines a little, bit by bit over the last 4 decades or so. And one of the major consequences of that is illustrated in my next slide. And this is the percentage of the adult population with doctor-diagnosed diabetes. Again, this alludes back to Ketan's initial point. Many don't know that they might have it. So these are people who do know. And you can just see how we went, again, over a 25-year period. We've gone from about 2% of the population, of the adult population, to something in the region of 7% now. And this is significant. It's significant for individuals with diabetes. While many people can manage their diabetes very successfully and escape many of the long-term complications that can befall, others are less fortunate, and those complications can really impact on people's lives. Diabetes is the commonest cause of blindness in people of working age. It's the commonest cause of kidney failure. It probably doubles the risk of things like heart attack and stroke. And it's the commonest cause of people, unfortunately, losing their limbs across the country. So it has significant impact. It has significant impact on the health service as well. This is a figure that's been quoted for a good decade or so, but a clever health economist once upon a time did some sums to derive the fact that we probably, and this goes back a decade, it's probably significantly more now, that we were at that point spending a good 10 billion a year on the treatment costs for people with diabetes. So this is not insignificant, primarily for individuals, but for communities and for the NHS and broader society as well. So an opportunity befell. I was appointed as National Clinical Director back in 2013, and we put out a strategy for the years ahead for the NHS in England. This coincided, Ketan will probably remember this, it was published just within the 6-month window before the 2015 general election. And the timing panned out quite well for us, because all three political parties, major political parties, embraced the document and gave some assurance that they would implement the suggestions within this post-election. And indeed, that's what happened following the general election in 2015. But I've put a quote there from what was called the 5-year forward view back in 2014. The future health of millions of children, the sustainability of the NHS, and the economic prosperity of Britain all now depend on a radical upgrade in prevention and public health. So instead of being a very reactive health service, where I might have spent many years of my life sitting in accident and emergency on a rota, one in whatever days, dealing whatever comes through the doors, reacting to that situation, this is the concept of being far more proactive and preventing those people coming through the doors in the first place. So, so that was the undertaking, and there was a clear opportunity here. And I was aware that some of the best evidence across the world, really, for implementing prevention at scale sat in the type 2 diabetes prevention space. And there'd been a number of very well conducted clinical trials across different continents of the world, all showing that if you focus on intervening and supporting behavior change to modify lifestyle, predominantly supporting people to lose weight, to exercise more, and to eat more healthily, those sound very straightforward factors, but the evidence is immensely strong that you can reduce what we call cumulative incidence over many years of type 2 diabetes by up to 60%. So the evidence was sitting there already. Then there was this stated intent to give a much bigger focus to prevention, and this seemed like a really good opportunity that we were able to run with. And so when we talk about prevention in the context of type 2 diabetes, I'm going to talk about 3 different dimensions and just qualify what I mean. Primary prevention is what we do to the whole, or what we can do if the population are on board with this, is what we can do to the whole population to the risk, to address the risk of type 2 diabetes. Now, I've already shown you that weight gain is one of the major factors of onset of type 2 diabetes at population level. So are there factors and things that we can implement at population level to reduce that risk? And there are indeed, and the cardinal example of what I've called here in red primary prevention was something that came in actually in 2018, but was heralded 2 years before that, and that was the sugar tax, people will recall. And it was said that, there would be a tariff for drinks that contained more than X grams per litre of sugar, and that would come in I think 1st of April 2018, and remarkably, after the political announcement was made, over 50% of drinks manufacturers reduced below the threshold way before that deadline of implementation, and it was seen as a great success, this, and it certainly there's work that's gone into calculating the very modest reduction in calories on average that's equated to at population level, but how successful it has been with zero effort on our part. We buy what we buy and we drink what we drink, but actually the sugar content was reduced, and that has had an important but modest impact to improve health at population level. And there are more things that we could do in the primary prevention space. As many will probably know, there has been talk about additional measures on unhealthy promotions, buy one, get one free. There's a lot of emphasis on the 9 p.m. watershed and not exposing our children before that time to adverts for unhealthy foods on television, etc. And so there are lots of other things that are planned to be implemented in the future, put it that way, in the primary prevention space. Then so that's primary prevention of type 2 diabetes. Then we have secondary prevention, which is taking people who we know or who they know themselves are already at high risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And the other important risk factor that will be familiar to many on the call, including myself, is family history. And if we've got a close relative with type 2 diabetes, we are clearly at higher risk of developing it ourselves. And those of us with South Asian roots won't have to think too hard to think of probably someone quite close in the family who already has type 2 diabetes. Certainly that's the case for me. So we can identify those who carry much higher risk. There's a two-stage process classically to do that. You do a sort of questionnaire that looks at family history and age and ethnicity and other factors and gives you a score. And if your score's higher than a threshold, you're meant to have a blood test. And then the blood test tells us whether you're normal to glucose, whether you've got undiagnosed type 2 diabetes, or indeed whether you're in that middle category, which we call many names, but pre-diabetes is probably the most tangible one. And we know that if we take people with pre-diabetes, and that's what the clinical trials that I referred to actually did, take people with type 2 diabetes and put them through an intensive lifestyle intervention program, you can reduce their risk of ever going on to develop type 2 diabetes. And potentially, even if they do go on to type 2 diabetes, you can delay that onset. So a really important target for intervention there. I'm going to mention tertiary prevention, which is how I've spent a lot of my clinical life down the road, I should say, at St Mary's in Paddington. So tertiary prevention is taking people that already have type 2 diabetes, are fit and well, but in whom we can support to manage their condition as well as possible and self-manage as well as possible and empower people to do that. And in so doing, reduce their risk of ever developing the nasty complications of diabetes. That's tertiary prevention. It's about managing people's glucose levels and blood pressure levels, and putting people on cholesterol lowering tablets. And I'm not going to talk on that tonight. I'm going to focus on the middle one there, which is secondary prevention, because that's where we've spent a lot of time and effort over the last 7 years it is now. And that's the NHS Diabetes Prevention Programme. As Ketan has already alluded to, we got traction, I think, if I may use that word, within that 5-year forward view. We said that we could do this if we had the necessary resources to implement, and we achieved that. And the Treasury's comprehensive spending review after that election allocated the funds to do this project. And we've had ongoing support, for which I'm hugely grateful, politically ever since then. We started the programme in financial year 16-17, which we called the first wave of national rollout. And so we have people who can provide a 9-month intervention, which involves losing weight and exercising more and improving quality of nutrition and giving people the support, information, and the sort of techniques to change one's behavior to do that over an intervention which lasts 9 months, which is that's a big investment of time on people's parts, but is based on best evidence to try to prevent diabetes. We rolled the program out, and it's for people with pre-diabetes. And I should say that way back in 2008, another policy was implemented called the NHS Health Check, which, among other things, does help to unearth people who are at high risk of diabetes or who have undiagnosed type 2 diabetes. And so we've been identifying people at high risk for many years before this program, but in many areas of the country, there was just nothing to offer, nothing structured to offer those people. And so the whole idea of this program was to provide that offer nationally. So in the first year of rollout, we hit about 51% geographical coverage of England. We have 5 providers that provide the intervention up and down the country, and each local area has the opportunity to choose which of the 5 providers they feel best meets their local population needs. So we hit 51% in the first financial year, 75% the second year, which was 17-18, and then the third wave was 18-19. And by summer of 18, as Ketan has kindly alluded to, we were the first country in the world to achieve full geographical coverage across the country, so full access for people. That coincided nicely with, I put the NHS's 70th birthday logo there, which was 2018. And that was quite opportune, which saw me on the telly a few times back then, which was quite exciting. So we got good coverage with this. Our early papers and publications, we also made data collection a routine part of this. So our providers, dare I say, it sounds harsh, they don't get paid unless they provide us with data on every individual every month, so that we had really granular data on how well the program was working, whereby myself, and I chair an expert reference group, we can digest that data, and we have tweaked the program month by month over the years to optimize the outcomes and the outputs for people. based on good quality data and evidence. So this was our first paper that showed that in terms of, people said at the beginning, it'll just address the worried well and it won't address the people really at need. And this was our first publication that showed that if we looked at the number of people referred, and this was the first 40-odd thousand referred, we were getting more people, an excess of people in those high-risk categories from South Asian and Black ethnic groups. So, a much greater representation than you see the proportion at population level. So we were very pleased with that. Similarly, we were seeing an excess of people from more deprived communities. If you look at weight loss programs generally, 85–90% of people who attend the commercial weight loss programs are women, actually. I can't explain why that is, but that's the truth of it. And we were achieving 45% men here, and men are at high risk of diabetes. So that was really important that we were getting reach into men as well as women. And so that was the first data we published. We then, looked at the first 350,000 people. This was after full rollout. This was a paper we published in early 2020, dare I say January 2020, before the world changed 2 months later, obviously. This was our data on the first 350,000 people that showed, really, we were delighted with both the weight loss that we were seeing, and that's what we focused on in this paper, between 3–3.5 kilogram average for participants. We were seeing reductions in glucose levels. And that led us to believe that we were well on course to preventing diabetes, and that was hugely important for us. The National Institute for Health Research in England, the NIHR, were hugely supportive of the program. We felt it important that rather than marking our own homework, that we have an independent evaluator utilizing our rich data to actually do an independent evaluation to see if the program works. And sorry, I'm jumping ahead. This is just to say the next strategy document came out in 2019 called the NHS Long-Term Plan. And we were doing well enough to persuade, and we were also generating waiting lists because it was such a popular program. GPs liked the opportunity to signpost people at risk into the program. And we had the opportunity to double capacity on the back of the long-term plan. And so our plan is that over the next few years, we get up to 200,000 participants per year. That's knocked back a bit because of the challenges of COVID. But we then roll forward to the Diabetes UK annual conference in March of this year, when the independent evaluation team that was commissioned by the NIHR, they're called the Diploma Research Team, it's from the University of Manchester, presented in oral presentations, not yet published, but the data they presented at this meeting. And this is really the punchline for the program. We've now got just over 1 million people referred into program, and they looked at all of the data we had right up to the beginning of COVID. And it shows that for people who complete the program, they are at 37% lower risk of going on to develop type 2 diabetes. And at English population level, the program has served to reduce the incidence, the rate of new case development. The incidence of diabetes has reduced by 7% at population level in England. So that really is a punchline, and we're hugely pleased with that. And that really should and clearly is translating into better health for the nation. So that's where we got to. Just a little aside, we always said it would be based on best evidence. Best evidence was all about group-based face-to-face sessions. But lots said, well, why don't you deliver it all digitally? Everything's digital now. I do my bank online, I do my this online, and why can't you deliver the program online so I don't have to pitch up to the community centre up the road to do the program? But there wasn't much evidence, and we did a pilot program to look at, to explore and expand the evidence base and to see if we could introduce it into the program. And we did this. It was properly sort of organized, powered. We needed 3,500 people in the digital pilot. We worked with 5 different product producers of digital interventions to prevent type 2 diabetes. And we followed for 12 months. And indeed, after 12 months, we saw as good weight loss with the digital pilot as we did in the face-to-face, 3.1 kilograms here. Reduction in HbA1c was as good. And we were able to disentangle some of the features of the digital products that were most likely to translate into better effect. Some form of peer support was important, a website was beneficial, and overlaying additional telephone support was also beneficial. And wasn't that fortuitous? Little did we know that we accrued the data. We only recently published it, actually. We had a delay because of COVID. But we finished this in the latter part of 2019. And little did we know that what was the date? Was it 26th of March, 2020? Of course, the whole country locked down because of COVID. We could no longer deliver the program through group-based face-to-face delivery because of lockdown and the risk of transmission of COVID. And how fortunate that we'd done this pilot and we knew that digital approaches could be implemented successfully with good results, because within 3 weeks of that befalling us, the pandemic, we converted the entire program to either remote or digital delivery. Remote is reproducing the group dynamic on Teams or Zoom, such as this evening, and digital is using those digital products that I've alluded to. And I now have some lovely data, so we can compare 120,000 people that have gone through the traditional group-based face-to-face with around the same number of that have had remote delivery and 25,000 that have had digital delivery. I'm probably pushing my time, Ketan, so I'll rush through a couple of punchline data slides. This is the data. We just submitted this for publication. This is interesting. The green line is the age distribution of people who attend the group-based face-to-face. So that's here. So the commonest ages are sort of between 60 and 80. And when you move to remote or digital, you shift the entire age distribution to the left by a decade. And that, we think, is really useful, because for a prevention program, we want to get there as early as we can in the life course. And so this was a learning thing that was we think a benefit of this newer approach that in some respects has been forced on us by the pandemic. And this is the punchline, really. How did it do in terms of effectiveness? So this is the face-to-face. 3 kilogram in the 120,000 that I'm comparing to here, it's not the whole cohort. We had an average weight loss of 3 kilograms in those completed. Remote was 3.3, comparable, actually statistically significantly greater. But look, digital was even more still, which is interesting. So, really encouraging that we had to adapt rapidly. So the program's gone well. We've had 1 million people since launch referred in. We know it's working to prevent diabetes. Weight loss is a good surrogate marker for if it's going to work to prevent diabetes. And we morphed the program as best we could in pandemic times very rapidly, but it looks as though the morphing delivery to remote or digital looks to be, so far, every bit as successful as the face-to-face delivery. I've probably exceeded my 15 minutes there. So that's a very quick run through the last 7 years of delivery of the diabetes prevention program. So I hope that's interesting and informative for people. I can talk forever about this, Ketan, but I'll hand over to you, and I'll happy to take any questions, and indeed take questions more broadly if people.
Thank you very much. So this is just the start of conversation, and obviously we couldn't possibly do justice to this hugely important subject matter within 1 hour, but this is just start of the conversation, and I'm hoping that we'll have you back a few months later, and we can have perhaps much more focused session. But for the time being, really I'm grateful to you for those wonderful informative slides, and of course very informative overview. So there are a number of comments in the chat, and I will take those comments.
Have I successfully taken my slides down? Have they gone?
No, they're still up at the moment.
Sorry.
So I'm going to bring some of my colleagues in for those questions that are appearing very fast on the chat function. But let me just kick off with the first question. You mentioned a great deal about proactive work and prevention work, Jonathan. And you also talked about a pandemic and lockdown, and of course, we might be in the new norm, but the COVID situation is still very much with us. And I know you talked about primary, secondary, and tertiary, but I just want to go back to my opening words where I was saying that perhaps something like 1 million may not know that they have diabetes. And I'm just keen to find out how much of that has been a setback particularly with the COVID situation, please?
Yeah, so we've had a really difficult 2 years. We had to repurpose much of the NHS activities. The healthcare workforce was repurposed to deliver COVID care, and there were consequences for more general care. There were consequences for access to routine care. And actually, for a period in the first wave, we saw a dramatic fall off, both in the number of referrals into the program, but actually the number of people who could even get a blood test measured. And I think we're probably all on the call aware of those difficulties. Really, what we did do, and I hope, and we've invested quite a lot on marketing, I hope this addresses some of the points that you've raised there. We provided an opportunity to self-assess their own risk without a blood test, just do the questionnaire. There's something called the Know Your Risk tool, which appears on the Diabetes UK website. And if you or I or anyone else across the country or on the call goes into that website, you're taken into a questionnaire which asks all the fields, age, ethnicity, it gets you to measure your waist circumference, your weight, your height. You put all the information in, and it basically color codes you as green or orange or red. If your risk is over a threshold, we tweaked the entire program to allow people who were above a certain risk threshold to self-refer into the program without a blood test. Now, we did a big marketing campaign, particularly in the communities that are more likely to develop type 2 diabetes. So in particular, in certain parts of the country, in South Asian communities and Black communities, we invested quite a lot on marketing to say to people, we know people are sitting at home. There is a risk, and I think many of us will recognize that risk, that a lot of people put on weight during the lockdown and during COVID times. I have got a slide somewhere that can show you that very nicely. So on average, people joining the program during the 2 years of COVID were on average about 2.5 kilograms heavier than people joining before COVID. Now that's before they did the intervention. And I think it just illustrates that many people across our population gained weight during COVID times. But we did provide this opportunity for people to self-assess their own risk and refer into the program. And I do just wonder whether many of us know if we got it in the family, and we've got a sneaking feeling that we're probably at high risk. And I'd like to think that a lot of people who had that knowledge embedded back in the back of their brains did take the time to assess their own risk and make the most of that opportunity to refer in.
We've got just great many friends from Brent NHS, my colleagues, Dr. MC Patel, Salma Meher, Dr. Amit, one of your colleagues, and my friend. Good to see so many familiar faces. Let me just open it up to one or two questions from those individuals. Varsha, you have already put your question in the chat. Maybe you might want to just read that question out for us, please. Varsha, and good to see you.
Thank you, Ketan Bhai. Dr. Valabhji, you did mention about the South Asian community. I think, how do we kind of get them a little earlier? Because from our community, people in their 40s develop type 2 diabetes. So just kind of, is there something within NHS England or your work that really shows that data? Because I think that evidence base would be really useful for this group of people. And it really getting to those youngsters. I think by the time you come to, your 50s, it's a little late. So just if you could illustrate that.
Thank you for the question. Really important point. If you ask me what I was most worried about over the next decade, it's young onset type 2 diabetes. We're seeing more and more of it. And yes, we've just recently analyzed the data. It's undergoing what we call peer review. It'll come out fairly shortly, I hope. It is actually published also on the NHS digital website. And we've done a specific piece of work looking at all people under the age of 40 in England with type 2 diabetes. So in other words, young onset. There's 122,000 people across England with diabetes under the age of 40. And there is marked marked overrepresentation in the South Asian community. A much higher proportion of South Asians in that 122,000 than you would expect by the proportion of South Asians across the English population. So you're absolutely right. Type 2 diabetes is befalling people in the South Asian community at younger ages, much more so. Black communities as well, to be honest. And, you know, a little anecdote of my own up the road, and you may have heard me sort of quote this before. It's not infrequent for me. I've been practicing a long time in the same place. I'll have been looking after the grandfather who's in his 60s. I also look after his daughter who was diagnosed in her 40s, and now I've got the grandchild diagnosed at the age of 31. And you know, I see that in my practice, and it's a really important point. There's something going on. We're seeing younger and younger age of onset. Those at young onset are heavier weight, more likely to be South Asian, Black ethnicity, more likely to be women than men, whereas overall, more men have type 2 diabetes than women, and that's an interesting point. And there's that mechanism of using postcode to assign people the fifth of deprivation, as it were, the least deprived and the most deprived quintiles, for example. And there's marked representation of the most deprived from people from the most deprived communities in there. Now, we're putting emphasis in this in our program at NHS England, but the truth is that there isn't a great evidence base to know, you know, should we use different drugs at earlier times in these young people? We don't know. There's no evidence across the world to be able to guide us there. But we are putting evidence on it. We are encouraging the funders of researchers to be investing in this area. And as I say, we've got a specific developing work stream on young people now with diabetes. Now, everyone assumes that that's going to be focused on type 1 diabetes, but it's both, actually. It's type 2 as well, for the very reasons that you've outlined. So thank you. That is a really important question. Thanks for asking.
Thank you very much. I got Dr. Amit Bakai's hand and Nina Patel's hand. I'll bring you both in, but I think I'll bring Salma in first because her question is pretty much related to the last point, but expanding on the point that you were raising about around prevention program. So Salma, really good to see you. Now, many of you will know Salma. She is a senior NHS manager working right across Northwest London. It's really good to see you this evening on the Zoom call, Salma.
Thank you, Ketan. I'm really excited to hear Dr. Valabhji here. It's always impressive to hear about his work, and Jonathan knows me very well and my passion to improve diabetes care across Northwest London. My question really is, and it's something I've probably brought up before as well, my interest is very much around identification of earlier onset of type 2 diabetes, particularly in children. We know that there is a growing number of children developing type 2 diabetes, but are there any plans for NHS England to do a pilot program for children where there is high levels of deprivation and obesity, because we know the two go hand in hand, to look at sort of a risk calculator? The reason why I say this, because we have no evidence, we have no data to start doing some work. So will there be any investment from our research to do a pilot on children?
Thank you for that question, Salma. Jonathan?
Yeah, it's a really important area. I agree with you, Salma, and I think we've talked about it in other meetings before, haven't we? This is a difficult area. It's evidence-free. I'm not allowed to use my budget for pure research. It has to be service delivery, really. And so we're going to have to be dependent on the funders of research, the NIHR, Diabetes UK, and they're already aware of our concerns in this space. Now, the difficulty sits with the fact that all of the evidence for intervention, there's good evidence for what we're doing, and all of it sits in taking people with pre-diabetes and preventing them progressing. It's very hard to find children with pre-diabetes, firstly, because actually not many kids have pre-diabetes to start with. And secondly, I think what we worry is that the rate of progression is so fast that they're passing through pre-diabetes very, very quickly. So to catch them in that high-risk state, you know, we miss the boat. They've already got type 2 diabetes. So we don't know how to do it and what to do. So a pilot I would love to do and love to have the evidence to make the case for investment in a pilot, but I don't think that evidence exists right now, is the truth. I also wouldn't want to overplay this. Of the 122,000 under the age of 40, only 1-ish% were children. So actually, across the whole country, there's probably less than 1,000 children with type 2 diabetes. So these are very, very small numbers right now.
Right.
I don't think we should be complacent around that, and I'm sure you'd agree with that. But the difficulty is we don't know how to address it because there's a lack of evidence right now. So I think we need to be nagging the funders of primary research around this.
Thank you. Thank you, Nina. Sorry for waiting that so patiently, Nina, and then Amit. Nina Patel. Sorry, I don't know whether she's still on the
Hi,
floor.
sorry, I'm still here, but I don't have a question at the moment, so I'm fine, thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Amit, please. Thank you. Good to see you, Amit.
Lovely to see you, Ketan, and thank you so much for putting this on. And Jonathan, thank you for being so gracious and generous with your time. We know how busy you are, and wonderful to see you doing this stuff. I remember a young consultant once who did a CT choreangiogram prospectively on renal dialysis patients named Jonathan Valabhji. I'm sure you're the same guy, right? My questions are along the lines that I've been doing so many talks recently to diabetes colleagues and to cardiovascular colleagues, and still the overlap is quite limited in terms of referring people with diabetes and breathlessness for angiography or stress echo. And when they do eventually make it, they do have multivessel disease, they do need bypass grafting, and we're glad to have caught them. But so much of the time, you know, folks are still saying to me, oh, what's an NT-proBNP? As a diabetic colleague, just as a cardiovascular colleagues would say, I don't know how to deal with HbA1cs and I don't know what the target range is. Could you possibly, with Nick Clinker, absolutely have a pivotal program for an overlap, because you're so successful as a diabetes national level work, but the cardiovascular prevention program, I still feel lacking, and I'm sorry about to say that as a cardiologist, but it is evident. What can we do?
A quick reply would be appreciated, Jonathan. I've got a number of people waiting and very keen to get all of those colleagues in with their questions.
What Amit didn't let on was that he and I were in medical school together in the 1980s. So, yeah, I do work with Nick Linker. We're starting that road, starting with the huge data resource that we have to inform how work might progress along those lines. But a point well made, Amit. We need to do more.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Dr. MC Patel, really good to see you.
Hello, Dr. Valabhji, thank you very much for your talk, and it's great to see you in Brent. I just wanted to touch on the last point that was made about cardiovascular disease and diabetes. We run the Brent Health Matters program, and we do lots of events with the public where they just come in, we check their blood pressures, etc., and look at lifestyle measures, a really holistic approach to people's health. We're focusing, of course, on diabetes, but what comes through very, very clearly to me is the number of people who are not adequately controlled, and also the number of people whose hypertension isn't adequately controlled. I mean, that is it's so mind-boggling that the numbers that are coming through who have, granted, it's a one-off blood pressure which we take, we take several readings, but nevertheless, a lot of people with diabetes have blood pressures well above what we would consider to be normal in diabetes, and certainly the Americans would frown at that. What is your view about that? And what about SGLT2 inhibitors? I don't, they're coming in more and more now, but in the communities that we're dealing with, the Southeast Asian, Afro-Caribbean, diabetes, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, hand in hand.
Okay.
What are your feelings about that?
Thank you. And talking about Brent Health Matters, we've got one of the leading champions on the Zoom call, Anish Goyal. Really good to see you. And maybe you might want to come in a bit later on if you have time. Jonathan, a quick reply, please.
Blood pressure is crucial to global diabetes management. I think we'd all agree it's not all about blood glucose. If we can treat blood pressure, glucose, and cholesterol to target, we know that translates into huge benefit. Can I give a bit of a positive slant on that?
Please do.
We've recently published a work. If you look epidemiologically at what's happened in the last 2 decades, it is a success story, both in the general population without diabetes and indeed in the diabetes population. We've seen a marked diminution in mortality and events from cardiovascular disease. I suspect a lot of that sits in the way, I think it's thanks to general practice that that's been achieved. And I think particularly in diabetes, the emphasis placed on diabetes management, and QOF has supported that as well, to give an additional resource to sort of help chase towards the end of the year those that are less likely to attend. And actually the fact that we've had blood pressure, glucose targets, getting people on statins, are all sort of additionally resourced through QOF. For people who don't know, the pay for performance scheme, I think has translated into massive benefit for the diabetes population. If another piece which will be coming out, well, is already published actually, mortality for the South Asian community with diabetes is now lower than for the white community actually. So, don't underestimate your achievements in areas such as Brent, where there's a really high populational proportion of people of South Asian origin. Things are actually going quite well. But you're absolutely right. We have to really aggressively manage blood pressure as well as glucose.
Thank you for that. Diana Colimo, you have just put an excellent question on the chat. Maybe you might just want to read your question out for Jonathan. Diana, good to see you. Diana?
Thank you, Thank you. I was on mute. Good evening to you all. I'm a health educator with the HEPS program, and I also wear the hat as a community champion. As you know, I'll call you Dr. Jonathan. Sometime back, most of the Afro-Caribbean people who had diabetes knew nothing about having diabetes and COVID. And I've lost about 7 or 8 friends due to diabetes. And that's what made me become a health educator and a community champion as well. So my question here is how do we go about getting better promotion or marketing to get young Black men from the Afro-Caribbean community to be more aware of diabetes? Because I facilitate a peer support group at the Wisdom Health and Center of Care. And I have a young man who's just 55 years old. He's African-Caribbean. And he said, I'm too young to have diabetes. So myself and the other facilitator, who is a qualified nurse, said, no, it's not your age. You can have it at any time, and it's also hereditary. So my point is here, because I've got you guys here now in one sequence to tell me, how can I go about, of other health educators, how should we go about actually promoting diabetes, especially to the young Black men in the African Caribbean community? Because we need to raise that awareness.
Thank you, Diana, for that wonderful question. Jonathan, please.
A really important point, and thank you for raising it. I need your help with that. I think, for someone like yourself, Diana, embedded within the community, you'll have much more traction than, how do I describe us, men in suits in, NHS England saying that this, that, or the other people need to take seriously. This is about getting the messages down grassroots at community level. And I'm really grateful for what you're already doing. There's no doubt that, COVID has had tragic consequences. A third of all deaths in England have been, unfortunately, in people with diabetes. We know that, it has highlighted the role of ethnicity in that greater risk as well, for the African and Caribbean community, for the South Asian community. It's shone a strong spotlight on that, and we must harness can't call it an opportunity because it's been tragic, but it has put more awareness out there. And I think the fact that COVID had more severe consequences in the African and Caribbean communities for any given age has to be a hook for us, because many did have diabetes, and that conferred a lot of the additional risk. And we've got to get that message out there. It links up to some of the earlier questions about young onset as well. We are seeing young men and women in the African Caribbean communities and the South Asian communities developing diabetes. And unless we sell the awareness through every route we can, I do my best. I occasionally get a spot on breakfast telly or something like that, and I do my best to sell the message. But it has to be, you know, all of us pulling and doing the things that we can all do. And I think you play a really important role in that as a member of the community who's doing the work that you're doing and connecting with these people at risk. So I think we all have a part to play in raising awareness. I generally, how do I explain it? Sniff out opportunities of funding or marketing opportunities, and there's all sorts, shape and form. You know, if you can get a storyline on a soap on the telly, you know, that's useful. There's all sorts of different ways that one can get in and raise awareness. And there's all sorts of different people that can do that. So I guess that's an ask and a task for all of us this evening, isn't it?
Thank you very much. I did say one hour was never going to be enough. And as Jonathan was saying, we could spend hours and hours and days, in fact, talking about it. But no, this was just the start of the conversation, as I've said a couple of times. And hopefully, Jonathan, Amit, MC Patel, and all our great friends, Salma, and just looking at the faces on the Zoom screen, Anish, hopefully we can have Varsha as well. Hopefully we can have another session in a few weeks' time, few months' time, where we can have a particular focus around diabetes. And hopefully, Jonathan, you'll be able to find again some time to join us. And who knows, we might be able to have an in-person event next time round. But I'm afraid I'm very sorry that wasn't able to take a whole lot of more contributions from so many colleagues on the call. But I promise you we will come back to this topic in not too distant future. But let me hand you back to Francis. Francis, thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you so much to Jonathan and everybody else who's joined us this evening and contributed either via chat or in person. It's been such a valuable insight into this really significant programme, Jonathan. So much to reflect and mull over. And as Ketan says, it's the start of the conversation. I am noting that there's lots of useful links and content that's gone into the chat. So I'm going to save that chat, and we will be able to send you some of that information and also the slides. If you've signed up via Eventbrite, you get an email with that information, and also a link to the YouTube channel where this video will be shown, so that you can point other people to it and further disseminate this information. So just to flag up that the next talk is going to be on mental health in a month's time, so keep your eyes open for that, and do send us any feedback, thoughts, comments either about this specific.
I think Francis has frozen up. The screen has frozen, Francis. But let me just say, there are just too many names on the screen for me to individually name you. But really, I'm very, very grateful for joining us this evening. And thank you very much for all your contributions. And most importantly, Jonathan, heartfelt thanks for taking the time out to be with us this evening. And thank you very much for the wonderful overview around what diabetes is. And of course, those very helpful replies to very, very small number of questions that we were able to take within the hour that we had. But until next time, thank you very much, friends, and enjoy the rest of the evening. It certainly is sunny here in Wembley. I hope it's equally sunny where you are, but thank you very much. Good evening to you all. Thank you.
Thank you.